Pat, one of the things I hear all the time from people who are interested in learning how to fly is it's so expensive. It used to be much cheaper. The truth is, no, it wasn't. It was, but it wasn't because, in 1990, when I went to flight school, when I got serious and stopped screwing around, minimum wage was $3.35 an hour.
Yeah.
Now, in some states, it's 5 times that. The average car in 1990 was $15,000. Today, it's closer to 40. And the one that'll blow you away, the median house price in Florida was $76,500. Now it's over 400. So it's not that flying is more expensive. Everything is more expensive, but on a sliding scale, it's relatively the same as it ever was. So the hurdle's not that much bigger, but because we're Madpropsaero and we care about our viewers, we have 5 tips for how to really save money in flight training and make it work out. Does that seem fair to you? Should we cover those 5 or do you want to go out to lunch?
I think we should cover those 5, Jamie, because I'm not hungry yet. I had a big breakfast. But something to mirror your point, some time ago, I looked at what I recall it costing me to learn how to fly way back, when Wilbur and Orville were still alive. And then factoring in the current dollars, trying to for inflation and whatnot, it was actually about the same. In 1969 dollars versus 2023 dollars when I did the comparison, it's almost the same as what you can expect kind of on average around the country to get your private pilot certificate. So yes, but remember, golf is expensive, tennis is expensive. If you own horses, it's expensive. If you own a boat, it's expensive. We talked about this at a previous session. A boat is being an acronym to bring on another 1,000. So no matter what you do, if it's a hobby and it's worth doing and you want to do it well, or a skill that you want to learn, it's going to cost you some money. So yeah, let's talk about those 5 tips.
It is. And the one price I wish I could go back to is my federal income tax burden. Because if I could pay the taxes I was paying in 1990 and get away with it today, I'd be so happy.
Well, you can do it. It's just whether you can get away with it.
Yeah, I don't want to go to the Graybar Hotel. I'm just going to
Yeah,
pay
yeah.
my bill. Hey,
Yeah.
tip number 1,
Right.
and I want to get your comment on this. Save money before you start flight training. Don't start and be running it on a credit card. Save the money before. What's your stance on that, Pat?
Absolutely. It really almost segues into number 2, which I'm gonna we'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. But if well, in fact, we might as well segue into number 2 anyway, because the reason for saving money beforehand, if you can, is to be able to schedule as many lessons as you can in a row. So number 2, kind of jumping there because number 1 leads into number 2, is if you can schedule 3 or 4 lessons a week, boy, that's going to do you so much better. You're gonna retain things longer. There's not a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a scenario happening, because if you schedule, let's just say you schedule 3 lessons in a week because you save the money to be able to do that. Then what happens if you've got bad weather one of those 2 days, one of those 3 days? Well, you've still got 2 lessons. What if you've got bad weather for 2 of those 3 days? You've still got 1 lesson. Whereas if you only schedule 1 lesson per week because either you don't have the time or the money to do so, what happens if it rains or the weather's bad that day? You've just missed out. And then what? Oops, next week, same thing. It's the wintertime. Now you're going 2 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks without flying. And that's a huge issue with just retaining the information that you learned, or the skill that you were introduced to the time before. So saving money in advance allows you to take advantage of tip number 2, which is flying as often as you possibly can over the course of a week.
I wish I knew you in 1987 when I started doing all this, because I made both those mistakes. I didn't save up, so I would fly for a bit and then I'd have to stop so I could get some more money, and then I'd fly for a bit. That's so counterproductive.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. If you're scheduling 1 or 2 lessons a week because you think that's going to work, there's either going to be a weather out or there's going to be a maintenance issue with the airplane that you can't
Exactly.
fly, or your CFI is going to be sick or got double booked, or there's an emergency with the family. And like you say, you end up going 2, 3, 4 weeks without flying, and now you're starting over.
Yep.
So, those two things, save money up before you start and then schedule 3 to 4 lessons a week. That's fantastic. Now here's tip number three, and I never thought of this when I was a student, but when I was an instructor, it made all kinds of sense to me. Schedule 3 hour blocks, not 2 hour blocks. Why,
Right.
Pat?
Well, if you figure that most lessons should include some ground school before you actually go to the airplane to review perhaps what you did last week and to talk a little bit about what you're about to do, because you shouldn't get into the airplane without knowing what you're about to do. That's going to take some period of time. It might be 10 minutes, it might be 30 minutes. Now you've got to pre-flight the airplane, and if that's properly done, that's going to be, I don't know, 10 to 20 minutes, kind of depending on things. Um, Now, if you're at a towered field, you've got to taxi out. You may have a wait to take off. Some busy towered fields, it could be 10, 20, 30 minutes maybe before you take off. There's a couple of schools in Dallas that are at a busy airport, and it could be a long time. Anyway, you get the idea. In a 2-hour lesson, oh, and by the way, you need to allow some time for a debrief when you're on the ground, when you land, because every good lesson should include a good thorough debrief with your instructor. So that 2-hour block of time, you might only get 30 or 45 minutes in the air. That's that's not good.
One of the things I remember happening when I was coming through, both as a student and as an instructor, there's only so many airplanes on the ramp, and the one you're scheduled to fly was being flown by somebody else before. So I show up for my lesson on time, maybe early because I'm serious,
Right.
but the airplane is just coming back. So the time I thought I'd be out doing a pre-flight, we're waiting for the fuel truck. So there's all kinds of reasons why that 2 hour block can get shrunk to an hour and a half or an hour and 20 minutes. And you're right, you just don't have enough time now to put in the full lesson. Schedule a 3 hour block, explain to your CFI why you want to do that. And all of a sudden you get to use your time a whole lot more effectively
Yeah.
because you're not feeling rushed or, hey, we got to be back on the ground by 2 o'clock. It works out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, number four, and I like this a lot because this is not something people think about. And we've talked about you're going to have maintenance issues, you're going to have weather outs, you're going to basically have days where you show up for a scheduled lesson and it's not going to happen for whatever reason. That's not a wasted day. You can use that time to work with your instructor on the ground. You could say, hey, could we start doing something in the simulator that would be beneficial? There's a way to use that time productively rather than just go home in defeat.
Yeah. One of the things that takes a little bit of time on the ground is, when you're getting closer to the cross country phase of your flight training. And let's say that you have a weather delay and maybe you're just about ready to solo, or you're just barely post solo or something like that. And maybe the next logical step in your flight training happens to be cross country. Well, you're going to have some ground in preparation for that, learning how to use the good old E6B or the electronic version of that or whatever, and how to draw that line on the map, or how to use ForeFlight if your instructor prefers to use ForeFlight, and learning all of the intricacies of that app. Or again, just drawing a true course on the map and then figuring out all the things that you have to take into account to figure out what the compass heading is going to be for that trip, how to pick a good checkpoint, um, how to pick your cruising altitudes, how to look at the weather and look at the winds aloft, and all of those things, that skills that we have to learn when it comes to cross country planning. That's just one example of the way that you could use a bad weather day in a way that isn't wasting your money at all.
Boy, that's great advice. It really is because it's unavoidable. The weather day, the maintenance day, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And to be able to schedule those 3 or 4 lessons a week, and when there's an issue, I still get to use that time productively. That makes all the difference because the faster I get through flight training, the less expensive it is.
That's
So
true.
all this stuff dovetails together. And even number five, tip number five, classic tip number five, it actually pertains to tip number one, where we were saving money before we start.
Right.
Pat, there's scholarships out there. There's scholarships all over the landscape, and there's probably one right up your alley. So, taking the time before you start, or maybe as you start, to look for scholarships and apply for them can make a huge difference in your out of pocket cost.
Yeah, that's exactly right. AOPA offers flight training scholarships. EAA offers them. Women in Aviation International offers them. There are a number of organizations that offer flight training scholarships out there. Um, you know something? A good friend of mine used to say, "No shots, no ducks." So if you don't go after one, you won't get it, you know. And if we could go back to the previous one just a minute, I was kind of talking about using your flight instructor for ground school and so on and so forth, which is certainly a good use of your time and resources. But remember, if you don't want to make a trip to the airport, maybe it's a long drive to the airport and you know the weather's bad and you're not going to be able to fly. You could do that ground school on Skype or Zoom, or you could even just take advantage of the downtime if you are motivated well enough to just sit down and read a chapter of whatever's coming up next on your training. So you don't necessarily need to spend that study time sitting face to face with an instructor. You can certainly do it yourself if you're motivated enough to do it alone.
Darn right. Darn right. That's five tips, Pat, that are going to
Five.
cut costs and help people get more effective flight training and really get through this in a way that they're satisfied with. But regular viewers of Mad Props know that Pat Brown and Jamie Beckett don't leave you with just five tips. We've got bonuses. There's more to this. So, one of the things, and I did this when I was a flight student, when I was shopping around for a flight school, go interview people. Go talk to the prospective flight school and find out, is this the place I want to go, or is this just the place nearest to my house?
Yeah. AOPA has a really good guide, field guide to flight training, or I think it's called a field guide to student pilots. And maybe it's what it's called. I can't remember. But we'll find it and put it in the comments section, and so that our viewers can link to it. And it's about a 50-page booklet that it's really an excellent guide. It has questions that you should be prepared to ask of not only the school but of the individual instructor. Things like do you help me set up my check ride? Do you have testing facilities that I can take my knowledge test? Um, what's your first time pass rate? Things like that.
I like those questions too. Is there a DPE on staff? Is there in-house maintenance? How many CFIs are there? And can I pick my own? All those things are valid questions. And,
Yeah,
and none of them, there's no right or wrong. It's what's your comfort level, what works for you.
yeah.
But you're right. Knowing what you're getting into makes all the difference.
Yep, absolutely. So that would be tip number 6.
And the last one, I think every time you go on a flight lesson, make sure before you leave the building, you've scheduled the next lesson, at least one more lesson, and you ask your CFI, what's next, boss? What are we going to do the next time I come in? Because if I'm a really smart flight student and I want to cut my costs and get the most out of my lessons, Pat, I want you to tell me what's next, and I want to study up on it. So when I show up for that lesson, you're all kinds of impressed that I already knew what the basics were.
Yeah, there's all kinds of YouTube videos out there during various phases of flight training. Your flight instructor will know the good ones, and the one and should know the ones to stay away from, because there's some of those too. But if you stay with the major players in the game, the M0As, the Kings, the Sporties, the Gold Seals out there, again, the kind of the major players in the game. The videos there are really generally spot on, but there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that are good. And of course, Gleim has lots of books, as does Jeppesen and other sources that are all good textbook resources as well. So between the written word and video, there's a lot of information out there that can help you prepare for the next lesson. And as you said, Jamie, and I really want to emphasize this, the student or the learner, I think we're supposed to call them now. I can't do that. They're still students.
I'm with you. I still stay student.
Yeah,
It's I
yeah, I know. The student should never walk out the door without knowing what's coming up next. Really, even if for some reason the instructor doesn't have time to sit down for a thorough debrief, and by the way, occasionally that may be okay, but it should not be a regular thing. You should expect a good thorough debrief when you're done, but you should never let the instructor get away without finding out what's coming up next so that you can begin to prepare for it. Those tips really will save a lot of money in flight training, but it
oh
is
yeah.
expensive, Jamie.
Oh yeah, but it doesn't have to be prohibitively
That's
expensive.
exactly right.